up on this week's show, an incredible new Sega Saturn racer lands.
A legendary computer magazine returns.
And we celebrate Amiga's 40th birthday with the original developers live from VCF.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our incredible friends at Bitmap Books. Now, of course, today we're going to be celebrating the Amiga. Have you seen their amazing book, Commodore Amiga, a visual compendium? Now, this covers all the benchmark Amiga titles, starting in the early days, Defender of the Crown, Barbarian, going through all the classics that we remember, Rocket Ranger, Populous, Can of Fodder, Speedball, Worms, weighing in at more than 420 pages. If you love the Amiga, you need to check this out and the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. And with our friends at PCBWay. Now, I'm sure you know about PCBWay. Big supporters of the retro community. They offer fully featured custom PCB prototyping services with low-cost, fast turnaround quality boards. And if you're in the market for things like 3D printing and injection molding, they've got you covered. And check out their shared project section on their website and get an instant quote right now at PCBWay.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 476, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Bill Winters, also known as Amiga Bill.
Amiga Bill joins the team. Welcome, Amiga Bill.
Let's go, baby. 40th anniversary. I'm so pumped. Let's do this.
Well, the reason that we do have a special guest host on this week's podcast, not only did the timing work out very well because Joe's away sunning himself this week, but obviously I did kind of touch on the last couple of weeks that you and I, Bill, we were hanging out at this incredible event over in New Jersey a couple of weekends ago called VCF East, the Vintage Computer Federation. My first time out there. Ravi went a couple of years ago. You've been a regular for many years out there, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. It's one of my favorite shows. It's my local show. You know, it's only about an hour and a half from my house. So our club, Westchester Amiga User Group, always puts on a good showing at VCF East, and it makes it easy for us to transport our stuff because, you know, we've got it at our houses so we can throw it in our cars and drive it down. So it's definitely a great show for us to exhibit at besides just attending. But yeah, I've seen the show evolve it's gotten so big over the years. It's pretty amazing. I remember going back in the late 2000s, and there were maybe like 50 folks there, and now it's just absolutely exploded. There, like the whole museum and complex is just busting with computer nerds. It's great.
Yeah, I think this is why Joe's avoided this show, because it's far too computery for him. This one.
We make no apologies. All about the Amiga this week. Yes.
Yes, definitely. And you know, this VCF was the Amiga's 40th birthday.
Yeah.
And I went before, and I kind of wish I attended this one because it had an absolutely legendary lineup, and you guys must have just been in heaven with who was there.
Yeah, one of the great things about VCF East is that it takes place at the Info Age Museum, which is an old army base in Wall Township, New Jersey, and it's in the shadows of Commodore's former headquarters in Westchester, Pennsylvania. So like a lot of the original engineers and Commodore employees, they're still around. Like they didn't go too far. So we have a really good showing of Commodore folks every year. You know, Bill Hurd is sort of an icon there. You know, he helps out so much, and he helps out like wrangling the talent as well as, you know, putting on his own talks as well. So he's just always been instrumental to VCF East, and there's many other folks. Dave Haney's in the area as well. Dave Haney's always been the big supporter of VCF East, and yeah, it's a great advantage to have a show that's like literally like right in the shadows of Commodore.
And you always love filming it as well, don't you, Bill? Because there's some amazing panels that go on there. And this week we've got a really interesting panel as well, which, you know, our own Dan Wood hosted, which was absolutely fantastic. But also I think this panel, we do talk about Amiga a lot. You know, we're massive Amiga fanboys. If you're into just general computing, you know, having all these experts and original team for a computer that was developed is amazing just to have in one place. So even if you're not a huge Amiga fan, I definitely recommend this as a good listen.
Yeah, so this was obviously the Amiga turns 40 this year, which is a reason that the Amiga was so well represented at VCF this year. And there's two panels that we did. We're going to bring the first one to you on the podcast today, thanks to Bill, who kindly recorded it for us. Now, this was with this panel was with the OG Amiga All-Stars. So we had Dale Luck on the panel. First time I've ever met Dale. He was like one of the original guys who worked for Amiga, one of the original founders. He actually worked on it before Commodore even bought it. So he was right there
on
at
the
start.
Boing Ball demo, didn't he?
He did, yeah, with RJ Michael.
A lot of hardware as well.
He actually brought some of the original Amiga wire app prototype boards to VCF, which I don't know about you, Bill, it was the first time I'd seen those. These were actually the things that they brought to CES back in 1984 to try and get some funding for Amiga. But these weren't, they got shrunk down to microchips. But these were massive, big circuit boards, all hand-wired and soldered. It was insane to see.
It was really special to see it. And Dale even told me that this is the first time that those boards ever traveled east of Las Vegas.
Wow.
So they've only been living in California, and they went out to, CES in Las Vegas, and this is the first time they came out east. And he put them in big containers. But, back in the day, the story is that they actually bought plane tickets for them because each one of these boards has a name, and it represents the Amiga custom chips. So there was Daphne, which became Denise, Agnes, and Paula. So so it was really amazing to see them in person. I'd only seen them in photos, and it was so cool to see them in person. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was just mind-blowing to see them on stage in front of me. I got a bit distracted a few times, I think. I kept looking down, just like trying to examine what they were and like, oh, I've got a question to ask now. But yeah, it was a great panel. Dale Luck was on there. We had Ron Nicholson, Glenn Keller, Andy Finkel, Jeff Porter, Randall Jessup, Peter Scherner as well. So these were like legends of the Amiga, some really interesting stories about the early days of the machine. So we're going to bring you that panel on the second half of the podcast. But of course, you know the way it works. First half of the show, that's when we have a bit of a chat about what's been happening in the world of retro from over the last 7 days or so. And Bill's going to join us for the news this week. So we have got some good stories to delve into before we bring you that Amiga panel, including this. You a fan of racing games back in the day, Bill? Did you like Micro Machines and stuff back then?
Oh, yeah. No, I love racing games. They're super fun. That's a little bit different as a third-person racing game, but I was really into games like Test Drive on the Amiga and Super Skid Marks, which was a third-person view. Yeah, great stuff. I always dreamed of, getting my driver's license and getting in a real car, but until then, I was able to play the games.
Well, this is a really impressive new game that I think is going to make me dig my Sega Saturn out this weekend for a bit of a play over the Easter break. A new Sega Saturn homebrew game called Micro Motor Mayhem. Tell us about this, Revy.
Yeah, it looks good. We don't often see Saturn homebrew coming out. We see a lot of Dreamcast stuff coming out, and it's really nice to see some Saturn stuff coming. And this reminds me massively of, I don't know if you played it, Micro Machines V3, which came out on the PlayStation. And this was kind of like a future version of Micro Machines with 3D graphics, and it played really, really like this, especially one of the levels, they're based on the classic one. I think it was called Breakfast Ben's originally, where you had Cheerios on the side.
Yeah.
Also a bit of toast and milk and stuff like that. They were always on like domestic locations or in a garden or kind of, I remember there was a great one on a pool table as well.
The one in the bath, I always remember where you played little helicopters and stuff.
Yeah, it was always around the house. And I think this is a really nice kind of recreation of it. Graphically, it's quite tough because looking at it, the distance of where you actually see where the map is going is something that you really had to learn with Micro Machines V3 because it's very fast. And you can see on this one, as they're playing, they're doing the turns correctly, and there's not that much kind of view for what's coming ahead. So, you've kind of, I think maybe this developer's played this map quite a few times to actually know the ramps. It's good to see that they've got like multiplayer modes as well. Player versus player, which is always really important with, trying to get off the edge of the screen. When you're playing Micro Machines. What
do you think of the graphics on this, Bill? 'Cause I don't know about you, but I'm quite into that kind of early 3D aesthetic again now. It feels quite nostalgic.
Oh, yeah. No, the graphics look really cool. And I love I see it looks like he's on a playing card, and there's lots of humor. I see a stack of like loose leaf paper as well.
Yeah.
It looks like there's a lot of humor in this game. But like you were saying, the multiplayer aspect is what really makes the racing games fun. I remember playing Lotus on the Amiga and hooking two Amigas up head to head That was fantastic. And then, even playing like Mario Kart in college, having 4-player Mario Kart when you're together in the same room, playing together, whether it's couch co-op or just head to head, it just brings a whole nother dimension to the game. We're so used to playing, online multiplayer these days. So some of these retro machines, get us back together in the same physical space, and there's nothing like it.
Yeah, you can't punch your little brother in the arm when he wins when you're doing it over the internet. Yeah, you got to be in person.
I'd say this. The only thing that makes it look a bit different from V3 to me is the cars look a little bit floaty, just kind of based on the textures at their base, because they're very different, the track textures, and it seems a little bit slower actually, which that might have been a bit of a downfall in V3 though. That it was incredibly fast. Maybe this has been a design choice to kind of slow it down a bit. To give the players a chance.
Well, this game is called Micro Motor Mayhem, and it's by a developer called Jay Beretta. I actually made this for the Sega Extreme Game Contest. He actually won last year with a game called Cold Case. And you can download this for free. But also, like you said, it's very inspired by Micro Machines with all of those, the breakfast table and everything on there as well. But also there's elements of Mario Kart in it as well. So you got stuff like, you can pick things up and fire weapons and speed boosts and that kind of thing too, which I think, definitely. Like I remember in Micro Machines, there was a bit of that when you were in like the tanks, you could shoot, couldn't you? But I think having stuff like speed boosts and other weapons does bring a bit more fun to it, I think.
There was those things that if you went over them, they span you around as well, which were really frustrating. I remember when you got some speed up and then you just get stuck in a like little 360 spin.
Yeah, so it looks really good at the moment. It's a work in progress. There are 8 vehicles that you can choose from, customizable colour schemes on them. There's a few bugs that he's working on. It is kind of a early beta release of this, which you can download. He said sometimes you might find the odd crash and the odd glitch, and there's still only a couple of tracks of play in the game. He's got some more music planned for it as well, but really, I mean, this looks like something you could download right now and have a load of fun with it. It's completely free as well, so if you want to give that a download and play it on your Sega Saturn, I will link that up in this week's show notes. But like you said, nice to see some more Sega Saturn homebrew, isn't it? Because we got a lot of Dreamcast.
It's just been Dreamcast for a while,
I'm just blown away by the amount of new games and new homebrews that are coming out. Like I'm so tapped into the Amiga scene that I'm totally focused on Amiga, but it's nice to see all these other platforms getting homebrew stuff as well. And last year we had over 60 new games come out for Amiga, which is just mind-blowing. Yeah. And it's cool to see these other platforms getting similar treatment.
Yeah, we've seen stuff for the Jaguar, and we've seen stuff even coming out for the Game Gear and stuff. So.
Last week we were talking about a new N-Gage box game. So, all sorts of systems are getting some love.
I love that.
Yeah, good excuse to get the Saturn out again. This looks really good. So if you want to download that, I'll put that in this week's show notes. Now, I think we're all big fans of magazines here. We have lots of memories of mags back in the day. I still love reading, Amiga Addict and Pixel Addict magazine. I know you're involved with Ravi, but this might be a bit more something that you've got memories of, Bill. This was a magazine that was popular in the US. I don't think we ever got this over here, but this is a magazine that's making a comeback after 35 years off the shelf. This is called Compute's Gazette magazine. Now, do you remember seeing this around back in the day?
Oh, yeah. It was an iconic magazine. I remember seeing it at all the major bookstores, the Barnes & Nobles, even our local Commodore shop would have this one. It was like I said, it was iconic. If you had a 64, most likely you subscribed to this magazine. And, I have memories of getting the magazine, and they used to put programs in it, like basic programs that you could type in. I was like, oh, I'm going to learn how to program in BASIC. And then I would spend like days, typing in all these lines of code only to finish and not have my program work.
I had that as well with magazines. And sometimes it was a magazine's fault. I don't know if this was the same with the US mags, but they'd often publish like an errata the week after, the things they got wrong. So, yeah, you'd spend hours rereading the code. And actually, they printed it wrong.
Definitely the magazine's fault. Definitely the joystick's fault. Never my fault. Never my typos ever. But it's a really nice story. It's thinking about like retro and how popular retro is still becoming, which blows my mind. I kind of thought maybe it was going to be like a passing fad, but as more and more people are coming, out of the woodwork, coming to VCF, and it's a really heartwarming story. The gentleman who's bringing this magazine back, his name is Edwin Nagel, and he got into retro in 2022. Like, sadly, his brother passed away, and he was inspired to take out his brother's Commodore 64, and that was the whole spark behind bringing back this magazine. So it's a sad story, but I'm glad that he can make this magazine and get into retro in honor, of his brother.
It's interesting because it had a interesting history. It kind of went into compute as well. That's what it changed to. And then in 1993, it switched to a disc mag as well. And then finally ceased publication in 1995. So kind of bringing this brand back is pretty interesting.
You mentioned then that Edwin's bringing it back. Now he's got the rights to the brand. So he's got a company called Compute Publications. And the idea is they're actually taking pre-orders at the moment for, it's going to be a physical magazine. Paper, you can read it in the bath, which is quite nice. But they're going to expand it a bit more this time. So
why do you always read your magazines in the bath, Dan?
Where else are you going to get distraction?
Always your reference point.
Yeah, I always read magazines in the bath. Good hour in there on a Saturday morning.
I still do. The worst part is when you try and stand up after you're involved in a good article. Oh, man.
Don't drip on the magazines.
I thought you were going to say all the frayed edges of the magazines afterwards when it gets damp. Yeah,
but I still read the magazines in there all the time.
Yeah, can't beat it. Good, but get your candles on as well.
I like that he's going to include some. He's not just going to include, even though it was originally a Commodore 64 magazine, he's going to include all retro and talk about like modern retro topics, which is really fantastic. I'm sure he's going to talk about modern upgrades to your retro systems, like getting SD2 IECs for your Commodore 64, maybe some Gotex for your Amiga. So he's going to keep his finger on the pulse of lots of the exciting things that are happening in retro.
It's a good idea, kind of going multi-format, because you've got that history there, and I don't know if that user base would be enough to sustain it. But getting people generally interested in retro might give it a bit of a longer life. It's always tough, the magazine world at the moment.
It is. Like if I read a magazine like Amiga Addict, which is amazing, it goes deep into Amiga. But you know what? If this new magazine has some Amiga in it, and then I also have some Commodore 64, maybe some Sega, I'll start perusing over there, and I'll learn some new things about other systems as well. So it's very nice to have them all in one place.
Yeah, and I love just a paper magazine as well. It's you can read stuff on an iPad and everything, but yeah, just the fact that you can just lose yourself in a paper mag, and you don't have to worry about being interrupted by notifications and all that kind of thing. I do really enjoy reading paper magazines still. So nice to see another one relaunching onto the market. So they're accepting pre-orders. The first relaunch issue is going to be coming out July this year. There's going to be monthly subscription plans for print, and there is digital versions as well, and also a free tier with select online content that's going to be available too. So they have got a website that's up and running now called computesgazette.com, which I'll put in the show notes as well. So good luck. We look forward to seeing what they do. Now, something else you might want to pre-order, because this does look pretty cool. Now, this is from Limited Run Games. So I know whenever we mention Limited Run, there are some people that, they've had a bit of flack recently. We know the stories about them putting out games on burnt, CDRs and that kind of thing, which I know they did apologise for. But it looks like they might be getting a few brownie points back with this, because actually, if you're a fan of probably the greatest FPS game of all time, let's be honest, Doom, they are going to be releasing they're calling this a hellishly awesome collection, pre-orders of which go on sale this weekend from April 18th to May 18th. This is Limited Run Games, who are doing a collection of Doom 1 and 2 for all the modern platforms. Now, we'll get into kind of the the more esoteric stuff they're offering soon, I imagine. But in terms of having these games, I mean, I've talked about this on the podcast before. I mean, Joe and I were chatting about it a couple of episodes ago. Like, I can't count on one hand the amount of times that I've bought games like Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2. I imagine Doom's probably up there as well, the amount of different formats and systems I must have bought that game on over the years.
Yeah, Doom's like, well, we've got a very exciting Doom guest coming next week, actually. Yeah, I won't mention more about, but Doom's like that kind of game that's on everything, and it's because, they were so open with giving out the code and, basically creating the basis of testing things. Does Doom run on it?
Well, they've even there's a little play on that. They're calling this the Will It Play Doom pack.
Yeah, which is insane. Considering you can run Doom on like a pregnancy tester, They've now got it working on the game box.
This is an actual box. You're talking a physical box that the game comes
Physical box, yeah, that you can actually play Doom on. Now, this is part of 2 packs. So there's 1 pack here that is, a reasonable price that contains the Doom games for multiple systems. You've got your Xbox, PS2, and your Switch version there. PS2, sorry, PS5.
Ravi's retro through and
going
through.
a bit too retro there. And then you've got your big box edition, which, has a cassette soundtrack.
4 cassette tapes.
Yeah, I think is pretty cool. Yeah, to see red cassette tapes. Has the games, also has 2-piece big box and some autographed cards as well, trading cards. And then you've got this insanely expensive $666 pack with a box that plays Doom. It's got like a handheld Doom console as well, a floating head as well. I can never say what that is. And
demons,
yeah, one of the demons. It's got Sigil as well in there, which is the unofficial 5th version
by John Romero.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I don't know. It's limited to 666 copies. Do you think they'll be able to sell that many?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're thinking of games that are big enough to warrant that, I'd say there's probably only a handful of them, and Doom is probably one of them.
Yeah, and this was definitely geared towards the hardcore collectors. Yeah. It's the looking at all the items that come in the pack with the floating head, and I am excited about the cassette tapes though, and that's something that it kind of blows my mind, how cassette tapes are making a comeback too. It's like I see new bands releasing their albums on cassette tape because the kids love the physical media. It's something they've never had before. So it's pretty cool that they're releasing on cassette tape. And the 666 copies is perfect. Metal.
I think clothing would have gone down like a bit better for me personally if they had like a Doom t-shirt and, they had some like limited edition Doom jacket or something that went with it. A Doom trench coat, that would have been cool.
Some trading cards too, it looks like.
Yeah. You're right about the cassette tapes there, which is weird because I remember a few years ago when I started reading about the cassette tape comeback, and I remember thinking, why the hell would you ever want to listen to anything on cassette tape? That was one technology that I really wasn't sad to see the back of, and I finally got my mini disc player, then iPod, not having that kind of background hiss and everything. And I couldn't understand why anyone would get nostalgic for it. And then it's when we did our Retro Hour Kickstarter.
And you released a cassette.
we decided for a bit of fun to do a cassette version for one of our Kickstarter tiers. Actually bought a cassette player for it. Found a load of old cassette tapes that I had. Found my old Walkman. And yeah, I have actually walked around the house listening to some of my old tapes from back in the day and enjoyed the experience. So, yeah. I can't understand why, but there is something very nostalgic about it.
Yeah, I find it really exciting that the younger folks are interested in the older technology, and there's a market for that. I really think they've never experienced physical media before. They've grown up, downloading MP3s, and it is a different experience listening to an album or your favorite music, on physical media. Especially, I mean, my favorite is vinyl, of course. You just kind of, it's a ritual. You take the album out, you put it on your turntable, you read the liner notes, and like you sit there and you focus on the music. A lot of the music these days is just background music. Oh, I'll just throw on this YouTube playlist or Spotify playlist or this MP3, and I'll do something else. But like when you have physical media and you go through the ritual of putting in the cassette tape, having to turn it over, or putting on your vinyl record, it just becomes you're really focused on the music, on the medium.
Yeah, I think a lot of people love that, and you're right. I'm especially going to record shops. I'm seeing some cassette tapes on sale, and a lot of young people going around and purchasing them and kind of enjoying that experience as well. Yeah, it's a good idea to have that in that out of the whole pack. The cassette tapes are like, oh, that does appeal to me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to walking around my village blasting the Doom soundtrack on my Walkman. That'd be cool. But yeah, if you're interested in just the games, though, not all the expensive extra stuff, they're going to be releasing the pack of Doom 1 and 2 for, it's in dollars on this, on Retro Dodo's article, $29.99. Which I think is reasonable. Doom 1 and 2 packaged nicely to work on modern systems. They all come with Sigil 1 and 2 included as well. They've also enhanced the games. You've got 16-player cross-platform online death matches It's got a Boom source compatibility, an in-game mod browser, upgraded visuals, and obviously support for modern controllers is included too. So I think that's pretty decent. I think in that price, $29.99 for all those improvements and the sigil packs as well that you can run on a console. Yeah, I don't think that's bad at all. So, they're going to be taking pre-orders for that from April 18th until May 18th on limitedrungames.com. Now, obviously, we said this episode is going to be a bit Amiga heavy. We make no apologies for that. And this is a story I know you were chatting about on your Amiga live stream at the weekend, Bill. And this kind of landed when I was over in the US. And we had a week in Manhattan, kind of around VCF. And didn't get a chance to install this on my Amiga until I got back a bit earlier this week. But I have now got the new version of Amiga OS, version 3.2.2, that I installed on my lovely Amiga 1200.
Very
that is next to me.
Named.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't always come up with the most memorable names for these updates. But I think the headline is that, the classic Amiga OS for the old school systems is still getting development and updates.
Yeah, that is the big news in my opinion. This is a smaller update. It has like well over 50 upgrades. Since the last Amiga OS, but it's not a huge update. There's been some updates to the reaction. The text editor has got some updates. They've freed up 12 kilobytes of RAM, which is great because we're limited to our 2 megabytes of chip RAM on the 1200. So it's nice to get 12K back. They've come out with a new updated Kickstart ROM chip for you as well. So it's an incremental update, but the real news is that the Amiga OS is still being developed and updated. There's a lot of great people in the Amiga community contribute to the updates. So it's just awesome that the community is so active and that there are the operating system is still being supported. There was with the newer 3.132 originally dropped, there was some really nice features that allowed you to like drag windows off the screen and allowed you to use a scroll wheel with your workbench. Now some of these features have been out there, as sort of like third-party apps, but they've kind of put them all together into one place.
It seemed like for years they were like patching together. I think it was OS 3.9 and all these kind of later ones. They had all these little features in there, like
which we should clarify. Weirdly, Amiga OS 3.9 came out 20 years before 3.2.
Yeah, not to confuse people or anything, but there was a lot of features that were missing from it, and it seems like they've recently been adding them. Stuff like being able to double click a ADF and then mount that file. Kind of ease of use and quality of life updates. I think this update is a really small, tiny one, and I hate to be a bit cynical, but I think maybe with the Retro Games Limited stuff recently, they might have released it as a bit of a good news story. But it is good to see that there are updates. I hope that there's something a bit more major that comes in rather than just bug fixes and stuff. But it's good to see it being continued. I use it. It's good to get updated Kickstart ROMs as well. And this also works with, new graphics drivers and other programs that are getting updated. So this kind of new environment is actually helping other programs and, helping the OS run a bit better as well, which we all want that extra 12 kilobits of chip RAM.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, because I know a lot of people just kind of use the Amiga for games, which if you do, this is pointless. There's no point in getting it if all you want to do is play old school Amiga games. But I think all of us three, we enjoy using the operating system and applications as well. So
we like
us,
computing on it. That's as well as doing the games,
Yeah, it's definitely a mix of both.
Yeah, and there have been, some applications that have been released in recent years. Like randomly, there was a Chat GPT client that you can run that only works on Amiga OS 3.2. And I remember the guy got a bit of flack on some of the forums going, why don't you make it work on all the systems? And he's like, well, if people don't make software that takes advantage of the new features in 3.2, it's pointless having it out there, which I agree with. It's gives people an incentive to upgrade. So, yeah, I think it's awesome that it is still in development. And I've got it installed on, like, say, my 1200 in here, my 4000 in my other room. And I don't know if you guys have felt the same, but the system just feels so much more responsive without years of kind of patches and all that laid on top.
I think for actual Amiga hardware, it feels a lot more solid. I've tried it in emulation because sometimes you need to emulate and set up environments. I found that tougher to get compatibility with stuff, and maybe that's because I'm setting it up incorrectly. But I found on the hardware it feels absolutely rock solid.
Yeah, I've had pretty good luck with it myself. It's so funny because I like seeing where they're going with it, but I also like the old school 3.1. So I kind of have two setups. I've got my original 3.1 setup to bring back the nostalgia feel, and sometimes it's actually nice to go back to that. You maximize your chip RAM, get 4 colors on the workbench, and then other times it's nice to see the latest Amiga OS setup with your scroll wheel on your mouse cooking. It definitely brings it into the modern.
I can actually use it.
You can never have too many Amigas, Bill. Yeah, it's worth having a few setups.
Exactly.
So Amiga OS 3.2 is still available to buy, but if you have got it, that is a free update as well for all users, and available now. I'll put that in the show notes too. Now, this is a kind of follow-on story from something that we've been covering over the last month or so on the podcast. All of these incredible games that keep being discovered that we previously weren't aware of. Now, this is from a company called Enigma Variations, and you may have heard us talking about the unreleased NES versions of Sensible Soccer and Populous that have been found in the last month or so that are available for everyone to play now from the fantastic website The Games That Weren't by Frank Gaskin. Awesome site. We had Frank on the show a couple of years back as well. I love that website because he preserves a history of games that never made it to market and tells the stories behind them as well. Often interviews the developers, shows them in various states of development, and often, like is the case with today's story, you can download them to play on your system or via emulation. Now, this is another game that was in development by Enigma back in the early 90s, a 1993 side-scrolling mech beat-em-up called Mechanoids 2, The Final Conflict. Have you guys watched this sort of video playthrough? There's a couple of minute video with commentary that you can watch. What do you think of this?
I think it looks very like Streets of Rage, the background, the layout of it, but also it's got a bit of a Double Dragon feel in there as well. It's interesting because obviously it's not so well developed. There's two versions that got released. One which is just kind of a demo with no interactivity of these two mechs walking through the city. And to be honest, the backgrounds look quite Streets of Ragey, but in this first one, it looks a bit like Akira, if you ever played Akira on the Amiga.
I didn't play for long because it wasn't the best game.
So it's got that kind of look. And then, the second one where they've got actually fighting in, it looks like Streets of Rage. And there was another one that I always mention on the show, which is Cyborg Justice as well. And it does look a bit like Cyborg Justice. It looks like quite a well-developed title with a bit of potential. And, it's good that they're finding these games.
I can't believe how they're finding all these unreleased games. I know I've heard stories about people just putting in like a blank floppy disk and finding a treasure on it. It's unfortunately, someone actually took the time to pop in the disk and see what was on it because it could be so easy just to take a blank disk and, format it or just, back then throw it away. It's just amazing that so many of these games are being recovered, and they're just important pieces of history, regardless of how far along it is. It's really neat to have this history. Like you were mentioning, like Populous and Sensible Soccer, two iconic Amiga games on release. I never even knew that they were planning like an NES version. So it's so cool to see some of this history being discovered and preserved. It's like video game archaeology.
Yeah, well, it's always great to see them. Particularly, I think if you were aware of these games, or maybe you read about them in magazines back then, and you're excited for them to come out and they never did. It's always cool when you finally get a chance to have a look at them or even play them in this case. And this again is from Mark Greenshields and Darren Melbourne, who used to work at Enigma Variations. And it's interesting though because this is called Mechanoids 2, and no one's got any recollections of Mechanoids 1. So they're not really sure kind of where that
it's called the final conflict.
Yeah, the first and final conflict. But you mentioned that the first demo that you can check out is it's just a demo that plays itself, which they reckon was probably made just to kind of pitch it to publishers back in 1993 to try and get it on the market. And then there's a later version that is playable. It's got no audio on it. And I think, looking at it, I can kind of see, like you said, that definitely a bit of Streets of Rage in there.
And it looks it looks like 2 time periods as well. It looks like the first one was done a lot earlier in Snaz's life, and then second one was a lot more developed.
It looks a lot more slow moving than something like Streets of Rage. Obviously, the mechs, so they walk quite slowly. But you have got the, when you get grabbed from behind and you've got to thresh the D-pad and escape. It's got that kind of in there that a lot of fighting games had back then. It's an interesting look at kind of what could have been. So if you want to get hold of that, they've actually got the ROMs available to download if you want to play it via emulation or on an EverDrive. So I'll put that, and of course all the rest of the stories. You don't have to Google around. I save you the job every week by putting them in the show notes or on the website at theretrohour.com. Now, we have got a couple of extra stories just for our wonderful patrons on the way in just a minute as we go into overtime. Before we do that, though, just a quick reminder that we do have a patron that supports this podcast, and we're going to be doing another fantastic Patrons Hangout next weekend on April 27th. The Hangout is just an excuse for us to completely nerd out, isn't it, Ravi?
Yeah, of course. It's great because, we get a lot of like-minded people on there, but we get people from all over the world. And they've all got different experiences of systems, but also, what they were raised on and what they have in their collection. So, like, the knowledge base is huge. And it doesn't just happen around video games. It also goes into movies. It goes into technology, shared memories and experiences. We've talked about, like, TV services in different countries. And it's quite just, a good thing to see everybody and do the hangout. We started it in COVID, and it's kind of as like a support network really for the podcast. And we've kept it, and we've kept going and we've kept talking, and it's something I really look forward to. And I know you and Joe love it as well.
Yeah. We look. It's always a highlight of the month. Last Sunday of the month, usually a couple of hours, we'll have a couple of drinks and just geek out. So if you can join us for that, that'd be amazing. We also just dropped a new episode of our patrons only podcast, The Retro After Hours, which there is now 46 episodes that you can download. So if you join as a gold member above, you get access to that. Ad-free episodes, lots more as well. Exclusive area of Discord as well. But really the main reason that you're doing it is just to support the podcast to make sure that we can keep the lights on. So if you'd like to join our wonderful patrons community, all the details are at theretrohour.com. Now, just before we hop into our incredible Amiga 40 celebrations, just a second to give a massive thank you to a regular supporter of the Retro Hour podcast, and that is our amazing friends at Shopify. You know them, the ones with this sound. It's funny you mentioned then, Ravi, about us starting our Patrons Hangouts back in COVID, because I think back to kind of the early days when we started doing this podcast, figuring it all out when it was brand new, even how to get a podcast recorded and editing and the schedules and getting guests and everything. When you start something new, it can feel a bit overwhelming. Maybe you're starting a business at the moment or a side hustle, and you want to find the right tool that can simplify everything. Obviously, that can be a complete game changer. And actually, for millions of people who are running their own business or just have a bit of a side hustle going on, that tool is Shopify. Now, if you haven't heard of Shopify before, it is the all-in-one commerce platform that runs millions of businesses all around the world, including our friends at Bitmap Books. They sell their books on there. We sell our books via Shopify. And the thing about it is it's got all these incredible, easy-to-use templates, hasn't it, where you can set your own store up in, like, no time at all.
You can set it up, and, it's so easier than the old e-commerce that I used to do and stuff. I used to do WordPress development and, set these stores up for people, and I'd be ripping my hair out with updates and all the kind of stuff that I'd need to do, late night support for people when stuff went wrong. But, Shopify's got your back when you're creating something. It's super easy, but you can also get really advanced and go in there and make custom checkouts. You can also get 24-hour support. So, you don't need to do that. Any question you can ask, Shopify will answer. And I think that's absolutely fantastic, invaluable really, because if something goes down or, you're missing something or there's a wrong order, it's able to be sorted out straight away.
Yeah, basically having Shopify is like having a commerce expert with world-class expertise at your fingertips. So, a lot of big brands are using it now as well, like Mattel Gymshark are using it too. And they got these awesome templates, beautiful, they look gorgeous as well, to match your brand style as well. So whatever stage of business you're at, whether you're becoming your own boss this year, or it's a bit of a side hustle, you're doing trade markets, anything like that, they've even got these incredible little point-of-sale systems so you can sell in person as well. And they help you with your marketing as well, selling across all your social media marketplaces. Easy to create email campaigns as well. So wherever your customers are, you can be there as well. So why don't you give Shopify a try today? Now, of course, we have got you an incredible offer. You can try out Shopify for just $1 a month. An incredible trial period. So if you head to this link right now, shopify.co.uk/retro hour. Use our link, the know that we sent you, helps out the podcast. Get that $1 a month trial period of Shopify. Start selling today, shopify.co.uk/retro hour. And I'll put that in this week's show notes. And get ready to hear a lot more of this. All right, well, thank you for checking out the news this week. We'll have more for you on next Friday's podcast. Bill, thank you so much for coming on. That was loads of fun.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. I'm a big fan of the show. I listen every week, and you guys have great chemistry, the three of you. So I hope it worked out well for you guys and the folks. Yeah. Got something out of it.
Loads of fun to have you on. And if people want to find you, obviously Twitch gives a bit of details about where people can check you out.
Yeah. I have a AmigaBill.tv with all my links. It'll link you to twitch.tv/AmigaBill, and I'm building up my new YouTube channel, youtube.com/AmigaBill. I post the Amiga news there every Monday, Amiga news of the week, and you can see things like the panels, the VCF East panels, which we're going to hear in a moment on your show. And I hope to do some other stuff on the channel as well, doing some more like mini documentaries. But we'll see where the future takes us.
What films have you been working on recently? Just let us know.
In your day job,
recently come out.
Oh, in my day job. Yeah, well, the latest release was Becoming Katharine Graham. It's on Amazon Prime. It's about Katharine Graham. She ran the Washington Post during a pivotal time in American history when Nixon was president, and they were instrumental in the Watergate story. I also have a new, well, it's not new anymore, but it came out in the fall. It's the Martha Stewart documentary on Netflix. That was a really, really interesting and fun one to work on. Martha Stewart is kind of an icon here in the United States with her cooking, and she became she actually ended up in jail. And it's a whole her story. She's the first self-made female billionaire, and so the documentary tells her story all the way from her beginnings in New Jersey through her rise to fame with the Martha Stewart Living and her TV shows, and then to her downfall, ending up in jail, and then her reemergence, her new friendship with Snoop Dogg.
It's quite a ride.
Yeah. So Martha Stewart on Netflix. I have, if you're into technology, I've got one about tech on Netflix called Big Vape. It's about the rise and fall of Juul. Juul are e-cigarettes. They became massive here in the United States, especially with young folks. And it's kind of interesting because the folks who started Juul, they were actually Stanford University tech students, and Steve Jobs actually gave their graduation speech. It's kind of an iconic graduation speech, and they were two students, in the audience graduating that year, and they went on to start Juul, and there was this big debate: is Juul a technology company, or are they a nicotine company? And but yeah, these e-cigarettes were massive. They became like a part of American culture, and lots of underage folks were getting their hands on the Juuls. And it tells the rise and fall of Juuls. Juuls now banned many places, and it went from being one of the hottest things to being banned. That's a good one. And last and not least, there was a really interesting story. It's actually on YouTube. It's called The Silent Witness. I did it for a series called Life Stories, and the idea is that Life Stories gives free documentaries out to folks. I do a lot of work with this company doing shows for Apple and Netflix and all the standard streaming services. But you shoot 2 hours of interviews with, like, let's say Bill Gates or Barack Obama, who I've done those films for them, and most of it ends up on the cutting room floor. So they said, what if we put these out as full length, just interviews? If people who are interested in that person will want to hear from them, and we integrate it into curriculum so students can watch it, and we put it on YouTube, so there's no paywall. So Life Stories has been great, and there's one called The Silent Witness. It's about a woman who survived the Hiroshima bombing. An incredible story. It's a short film, just a little over 10 minutes, and it tells her story about how she was, walking down the street, and then the next thing you know, an atomic bomb went off, and she was able to survive.
Well, if people have only seen your Amiga stuff before, they wondered why your videos look so high quality and well produced. This is why. This is what Bill does in his day job. So fantastic. Well, Bill, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you, my friends. Thank you so much for coming on this week. And thanks to Bill, we're going to bring you this Amiga panel recorded live at VCF East next on the Retro Hour podcast. As a quick intro as to who I am, I'm just a fan of the Amiga and Commodore in general. Grew up with the Commodore Plus 4, then Amiga 500, 1200 after that, CD32. Grew up reading about these guys in magazines when I was a kid, and it's just incredible to be up here on stage, meeting some of my heroes and hearing their stories. I actually do a podcast called The Retro Hour that I've been doing now for 10 years. Which, if you haven't checked it out, you can get that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts as well, where we interview industry legends. So quite appropriate to be doing this today.
Dave McMurtry. Likewise, I really love Commodore stuff. I love learning about the history of the company. So I've been doing that for quite a few years, mid-90s. And I started gathering internal documentation and talking to people like this to ask them questions, because the best way to learn is ask the people who did it. So if you want to follow my stuff, at Commodore.history on YouTube or www.commodore.international is the website. That's everything. Jeff Porter, take it away.
Oh, boy. Jeff Porter. So I started at Commodore in 1984. I guess I was 2 years old. Yeah, I'm really that old. And I came there to do, they said, well, you could do C64 stuff. You could do Unix workstations. Okay, getting more interesting. Or laptop computers. I said, okay, let's do a laptop computer. So I went to make a Commodore LCD, which later got canned because we threw all our eggs in the Amiga basket. And then I said, okay, I'm joining the party. So to make a long story short, I was the guy behind the 500. So next, Dale.
I'm Dale Luck. I started at Amiga in 1983 in August. And I was the second software person there. And I also brought some historical stuff that I had been stashing away, the breadboards that we probably showed at the Consumer Electronics Show in January of 1984, and also like some of our test stuff, and one of the Lorraine prototypes. I'm not sure if that's war or peace.
So each one of these prototypes is one of the Amiga custom chips in TTL.
Or high-speed CMOS.
Okay.
I think at one time we thought that we had bought almost all the high-speed CMOS west of the Mississippi to do this, because we had two sets of all these three stacks. So the biggest one is Agnes. That's the address generator, the main blitter, and it has all the address pointers and minterms and things like that. It controls the DMA. And then we have Daphne, or Denise at this time, and that's the display generator and the sprites. And then Paula, or Portia, was what it was known back in that day, and that's the port chip. Portia was for the ports, and the floppy disk, and that's Glenn Keller's design. If he's up here, but you can talk more about that. First time I've been here at VCF East. And this is a 40th celebration, and we're going to have a 40th celebration in the West Coast, and so hopefully a lot of you guys can swing out there, because we have
Dale's from the West Coast.
Yeah.
A quick thing to mention real quick, Andy, before we get to you is Amiga was actually founded before Commodore bought them. So for the people in the audience who don't know that, Commodore didn't buy them until 1985. So Dale mentioned he worked 84. Dale worked there in 83. So he was with the original company before Commodore got involved.
So I usually I say BC, which is before Commodore, and AC, which is after Commodore. So this is BC. This is all BC stuff, but it was a good merge.
I'm Andy Finkel. I started at Commodore in 1981. I worked on the VIC-20, the Commodore 64, the Plus 4, the LCD machine, and then the Amiga stuff, the A500, the A1000, the A1200, and CDTV, pretty much everything. So I've been around there forever. I just followed Commodore
Right to the grave.
almost to the grave. At the end, I kind of jumped ship and went to NTG for a while and then 3DO.
And then you sort of exceeded the grave because Commodore hired you back as a consultant even after they were bankrupt.
That was a short-term thing. I put together the Amiga stuff from the Sun tapes and made the packages that got distributed to all the companies that bought Commodore.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Cherna. I started at Commodore in May of 89. I worked there until September-ish of 93. I was brought in and I worked on the software team. Andy was my boss, and I worked on preferences stuff. I worked on the gadget toolkit. That was my creation. I did a lot of work on the 2.0 New Look and the AA support, AGA support in 3.0, and I did a little bit of work on the CD32. I did work on the language screen and on the CD player software for the CD32.
Hi, I'm Randall Jessup. I came into Commodore in '88 along with Bryce Nesbitt. The hired by Andy here. I worked there till the very end, and the deathbed vigil was held at my house, as you've probably all seen. I worked on hard disk partitioning stuff. I worked on porting the Amiga OS from BCPL to C in assembler and network stuff. Also, I did a whole bunch of hard disk driver stuff, SCSI drivers, ATA drivers. Worked on the CD32, the A600, A1200, you name it. Did the 4091 software. And I brought some more show and tell things. There's an A3000 Plus with working DSP, one of 3 ever made, though they've now recreated them. There's one of the original 040 cards from the 3000 launch, had static RAM cache on it, though we didn't show it at the launch.
Hi, my name's Ron Nicholson. I'm the odd man out since I was here last year for the 40th anniversary of the Apple Macintosh. So I'm really an Apple person. I was never a Commodore person, but
Ooh.
But one of the reasons I ended up at Amiga was that Jay Miner was working on a chip for Apple, and later he hired me out of Apple to found Amiga. I was actually the first engineer there. I started actually before Jay did. As to what I did in the project, I did just a few little things. Like, for instance, that's the first wire-wrapped CPU board at Amiga down there. I think that's when I hand wire-wrapped. All I did was fill 3 room-size whiteboards with the block diagram for the entire system, including the video, the DMA, the audio, et cetera, et cetera. So played a small part.
Ron, you do have one distinction that you should mention between your Apple and your Amiga time. You got your name in the cases of both.
Ooh, that's true. I have my signature in the Macintosh case just a little off to the side of Boaz's, and I have my distinction in the Amiga case is it's a little above a dog print.
My name's Glenn Keller. I came in as a junior chip designer. For some reason, Jay liked me. I designed the audio chip, and then I was momentarily on cost reduction until I realized that Jeff Porter and Headley were so much better than that, that there was no point. They were way better. It was incredible. But, they were incredible. When we combined with Commodore, I was just amazed by both the friendliness and the competence of the engineers there. Anyway, later on, I did some AAA chipset design. I worked on all 3 chips under a guy named Jim Redfield.
You mentioned that about working for Amiga before Commodore, and if Apple got a boo, I've got to fit on the word Atari might get an even bigger boo. But Atari nearly bought the Amiga. I mean, for the OG guys, for Dale, Ron, and Glenn. I mean, do you have any memories of that time and negotiations with Atari, and what was kind of the story there?
RJ would tell the story the best.
RJ would tell the story.
But, as rumor has it, Commodore walked in with the check at like the 11th hour and 59th minute.
That I remember.
And, stole the company from the Atari bid that was about to close in the next 60 seconds.
Oh, that's right. How can I forget that? we were about to run out of money, and the paycheck was about to not to get paid, and Commodore walked in with a reasonable offer at the last minute. And that was right at that transition where Tramiel
Went to
suddenly
Atari.
jumped over to Atari, and it was pretty confusing. I wasn't involved in any of the business thing. I just know that things were very fraught.
So we had, Commodore acquired these 3 gaming chips, and of course the gaming market was pretty much killed by a Commodore 64, and so you had to have a computer about it. So they needed to build it into something computer-ish that also played games, because that was sort of the hallmark of what Commodore did. So the A1000 was the first version, and that was all done mostly on the West Coast, but a lot of the guys like Andy and the software guys from Westchester in Pennsylvania got hijacked to, make sure that product got designed and out the door for version 1.
So it was kind of a bait and switch. We thought we were getting a game machine, and we actually got a computer. When my group was first asked to evaluate the Amiga stuff, we were evaluating a 68,000 game machine, and with 64K of RAM, and 64K of ROM, and just a very minimal thing. And we were looking at it as here's a game machine, here's a successor for the Commodore 64. And by the time we got out to Los Gatos, we found out that it was quite a bit more.
So I had to build a whole computer around it. And so there was a lot of work. And eventually by April 13th, 1985, is that the date? I think it is.
Somewhere around.
At the Lincoln Center in New York City. So, we finally launched the A1000 in New York, and we had Bob Pariseau give a really nice launch talk there. He headed the software group on the West Coast, and we had Deborah Harry and Andy Warhol do that famous picture that somebody has the original of.
Yeah, let me throw in a little more backstory about that.
I went way through that fast, because go ahead.
Because Commodore, you were really supposed to get a game machine, because it was Joe DeCure and I were brought together. And Joe DeCure's background, of course, is he did the chipset for the Atari VCS and the 400-800. So he knew how to do game machines really well. And so I was to join with him because Jay wanted to add a few more high-end features to a game machine, but it was really supposed to be a game machine optionally with high-end features. But then a certain company released a video game that sold so poorly that we had to pivot. I don't know if I should mention that.
BT, yeah.
That was it, yes. So that caused us to pivot, and Jay was brilliant because he wanted to have a thing that could be both a game machine, a design that could be both a game machine and expandable to a computer. And we sort of left the game machine in there as we built it up into a full-fledged personal computer.
Jay told me he wanted to do a Singer Link flight simulator.
That's true. He and I both had seen flight simulators. And at that time, there were boxes about the size of a delivery truck. And Jay said, "No, I can shrink that down to a single IC." It turned out it required 3 ICs, though.
One quick question. Obviously, when the Amiga launched, the Boing Ball demo was legendary, and still is iconic today. I'm interested, Dale. I mean, what was kind of the backstory of Boing, and where did that come from, and what was the aim with that?
So the first Boing Ball demo came out in January 1984 CES, and but it didn't come out at the beginning of the show. It came out on the very last day of the show. We had lots of demos that we showed the Amiga capabilities, including audio and fast area fill and stuff like that to show the colors and things. But one of the demos that was shown was a demo that Sam Dicker wrote, and it was this big spinning ball that he used color palette animation. And it was a full screen ball, and I had this idea in the back of my mind, having done graphics at Hewlett-Packard and been going to SIGGRAPH for many years, and knowing the capabilities of the Amiga, I thought, I think I can do something with that. And prior to going to CES, I'd already taken Sam's original source code and shrunk the ball down and said, you know what, if I just change the bit plane pointers, I think I can make it bounce. So, which when you first do that, you actually get two balls bouncing up and down because you need to have extra space for that. But anyway, so I started working on that prior to CES. I continued working on that at CES. RJ was working on some of his own demos. And by, I think, early Thursday morning, which is the last day the exhibits are open, probably about 4 o'clock in the morning. And there's actually a lot of stories about RJ and me at CES working. And I finally got a bouncing ball, but it was just bouncing up and down. And I like bouncing because I was like a physics major for a while. And but there was no left or right. It's just bouncing up and down, and there was no audio. But the key thing is I could do something with the play fields, and I could cast a shadow using some tricks in the bit plane pointer. So I drew a mesh and have it cast a shadow, and it bounced up and down. And I was like, okay, I'm done. So I fell asleep about 4 o'clock in the morning, and the rest of the Amiga guys, the execs showed up at probably 8 o'clock in the morning to open up the show. And they all looked at it, and they woke us up and they said, wow, now we need to go back and get everyone that we've already showed the Amiga to, and we need to bring them back to show this new demo.
It was incredible, though, because obviously the Amiga's got screens, and you could drag the Boing Ball demo down and see the workbench behind it. I mean, that reaction, when people saw that, did that blow their minds about then?
Okay, so we had just gotten this set of hardware to start working on in December, 3 or 4 weeks before the January show. And we had been writing a lot of software, doing a lot of emulations. I wrote a Blitter emulator because I had no Blitter hardware. I wrote a Blitter emulator so that I could write code to poke the registers for the Blitter. And then when Agnes was ready to be plugged in, then I could just take my Blitter emulator out and plug in the real routine that would then poke the Blitter registers.
Dale did actually more than just write a Blitter emulator. He noticed in the Blitter emulator there was a feature missing that was easy to add. So he actually, at the last moment, threw in a critical piece of the hardware as the Bresnahan line drawing algorithm. So he was not only a software engineer, but he was, for a week or two, part of the hardware team.
There's a whole other story. A week or so before, I think 2 weeks before CES, because it took a while, I said, I could change my Blitter emulator with a few lines of code and make it draw lines. And there's really not much change to the whole Blitter. It's just, if you're in this mode, do this instead of that, and implement the Bresnan line draw algorithm. And everyone said it was too late. We're going to screw our schedule. And probably everyone, I think the entire company was against doing it, but I've been doing graphics software for a long time. And so they told Jay, you got to convince Dale that we're not going to do it. So he said, Dale, let's go out to lunch. And we went out to Denny's, and he said, okay, Dale, explain to me what you really want to do. And so I had brought all my stuff along, my software emulator, and said, this is all we really need to do. And he looked at it, and then when we came back, he said, I think we should do line draw. And so I think I made a few enemies for a while until they got the hardware line draw working. And then so they modified the Agnes chip and the Agnes stack to do the hardware line draw. And I think they probably got it done maybe only after 3 or 4 days, because the changes were very minimal.
I was the one originally against that, but then Dave Needle came over and convinced me this is how many extra ICs I would have to add to the emulator to do it. And that finally convinced me.
Let me give you some more color about CES. For those that don't know, CES, Consumer Electronics Show, right? So in January, this is always in Vegas. People float out their ideas for the most, extravagant, extraordinary demos of everything that they're going to launch that year. And then in June, CES, that one's in Chicago. That's when they take the orders, because that's the Tickle Me Elmo thing for Christmas that year. So the whole cycle is a 12-month thing, from showing the awesome demos to like, okay, now I got 6 months to actually build it.
And the awesome demos are really, a lot of it is smoke and mirrors. Like this,
absolutely,
this is what we'd like you to believe we can do.
It's total smoke and mirrors. And we're all, I can tell, I had to explain to my family how, no, I'm sorry, CES is like the first or second week in January. I'm missing Christmas because I'm working 24 hours a day to get the demo for CES done. And so it's, I'm kind of glad not to ruin my Christmases from now on.
And then at Commodore, we all worked the booths. They brought out the engineers, the accountant department, the marketing department. Everybody went out there.
It was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah.
But it meant that we were kind of busy for Christmas.
It was kind of busy for Christmas. And then I think it was in March, the big show was in Europe, the Hanover Messe, right?
CeBIT, right.
CeBIT, right. And so there was a permanent Commodore booth in Hanover, Germany. It was like a campus of like 12 or so buildings the size of CES. And in building 1, hall 1, was the Commodore booth, double-decker, and so after we got done with CES, a lot of the people had to go to Germany to support all the, smoke and mirrors in Germany, because that was the next computer for Europe as well.
So, Jeff, you happen to be sitting right next to me. You mentioned in your intro that you're responsible for the A500, and what that was a cost-reduced version of the A1000, right? And we can get back to exactly what you did to cost-reduce that. But another thing you cost-reduced was the CDTV, and I found that one more interesting. So the CDTV, if you don't know what it was an Amiga that was meant to go in the living room. It was in a black thing like a stereo component. And Jeff, you worked to cost reduce that. What was involved in that?
Hedley and I were pretty key in that. We did a little. The first CDTV was done by a guy by the name of Don Gelbreth. He'll be here tomorrow, I think.
Yep.
And so he'll tell you all the stories about building that in Japan. And it was kind of a skunkworks project outside of the engineering department. And by the time he got done, it was like costing 3 arms and 2 legs. So who is the guy that, made an A500 sell for about $500? Me. What did the A1000 cost? About $1,200. So the number of the model was a hint as to how much it should cost for that computer. Okay. So I got called up to New York, Irving's office. Irving Gould was the chairman. He was this old Canadian. Monday and Tuesday, he was in New York. Wednesday and Thursday, he was in Toronto. He was a Canadian citizen. And Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, he was in the Bahamas because he never wanted to pay taxes in the U.S. So if you spent more than 2 days a week in the U.S., you had to pay taxes in the U.S. So very important. If you ever get to that position, you need to know the rules about paying taxes in the U.S. But anyways, so Jeff, what can you do to cost reduce computer? Go in that room over there. You've got an hour. Come back. Tell us what you can do. Great. Okay. So Don, explain what you've done here. Blah, 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 blah. Oh my God, you paid $400 for that CD-ROM drive? Oh my God. How am I ever going to get the cost down for this? So Hedley and I did a tour of the world, and we went to all the places that invented the CD-ROM. So where's the first place you go for the inventor of the CD-ROM? Sony in Japan. And so I said, all right, I need a cheaper CD-ROM than this SCSI-based thing with a caddy that was like totally awkward. So they said, okay, here, 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 and here. I said, no. I want the one that you push the button, and a little drawer pops out. And then you just drop the disc in and you push it again, it goes, that one. You said, well, that's an audio device. And I said, it's a CD. There's data on a CD. I don't care whether it's audio or computer data. So I said, that's the one I want right there. That's it. How much does that cost? $15. Oh. Yes, sir. Now, and then they said, unfortunately, all the documentation is Japanese. So Commodore Japan, bless their heart, translated their entire technical documents on this $15 CD drive. And I said, Hedley, we don't really speak Japanese. We're going to have to insert somebody in Japan to be our gurus of this. So Chinon used to make the floppy drives for the Amiga and for the C64, and have been doing it for Commodore for years and years and years. And so I went to them and I said, I need you to make an interface here. Headley came up with this awesome idea to come up with an IDE interface for a CD-ROM drive, which, by the way, is the IDE interface that everybody knows today for the CD-ROM drive. Thank you very much. I'm not sure why we didn't get more money for that. And we had a $15 CD-ROM drive on a Austria CD-TV, which we made 100 of them.
So I have a little follow-up.
They had an awesome vacuum fluorescent display on them.
I have a follow-up on that, which unfortunately I had it sitting on my desk and was going to bring it with me, but I was had too much stuff already, so I didn't bring it.
I disagree. You brought just the right amount.
Okay. So I have a CDTV CR that is complete without a case. I never had a case with it. I did the IDE software for it. You had a little RAM expansion you could drop in there, which had an IDE interface on it, so you could put a hard drive in it. And one thing that Headley and Jeff and so forth also did when they cost reduced it, the new version of it was basically an A600, even to the point where the ROM inside of it is actually an A600 ROM. I was missing the ROM, and I had Beth Richards take hers apart, which is broken at the moment, but she took it apart. I wanted to get a copy of the ROM from her, and she took it apart and said, I don't need to give you a copy and send me a picture. It's like the A600 ROM.
It is. It is.
And so it was basically an A600 with this 4510, which was also the chip used in the C65, which was used to control the CD-ROM.
It was Commodore's first surface mount product.
Right. Yeah. And it was very nice and clean.
It was very nice. Anyways.
Yeah.
Okay. There was one other story about mega cost reduction. In the original A1000, you remember there was this Kickstart thing, right? You had to insert the disk and then it would load the Kickstart thing. So then it would boot into Amiga DOS and stuff like that. So the first A1000s had a little daughter board that had, I don't know what kind of
Big daughter board.
big daughter board. It was about yay big, full of, static RAM that got loaded. You don't want to know how much it cost to make that. So when the A500 came around, I found these 16-bit wide masked ROMs in plastic that Nintendo was using for their gaming cartridges and their game machines. And I said, that's perfect. That $5 chip will hold the entire Kickstart. Boom. So I think we went from maybe $50 for that board to $5 for that mask ROM. And didn't you actually take a plane ride to deliver one of those ROMs, Randall?
When we launched the CD32,
Okay.
I had to go to help oversee the pre-production run over in Manila. And I took a stop in Tokyo to drop off a set of ROMs to get masked by Commodore Japan.
So I think it was one of the large semiconductor outfits in Japan was making these ROMs for Nintendo. So we had to literally hand carry the, the internet barely existed. So it's not like you just, let me email you that or let me put that in the Dropbox and send it to you. No.
You sent an engineer halfway around the world with a little box to hand over.
Here it is, in a little gold box.
You mentioned Kickstart, the Amiga's ROM. I'm interested, Andy, when Commodore took over Amiga, what kind of a state was Kickstart in at the time? And I know, wasn't the Amiga's operating system written in a language called VCPL, which I imagine that came with a bunch of problems?
The VCPL was just the DOS, the DOS, the text user interface, the disk stuff, and that was in a VCPL by a company named Metacom Co. It was kind of an awkward fit getting VCPL into the Amiga, but the original Chaos disk operating system just was not ready and was never going to be ready, as far as we could tell. So in a last-ditch effort, they got Metacom Co., which was running on a 68,000, and shoehorned it in there. And there are a number of things that we could have done better with that, but we were kind of pressed for time.
And
it worked.
And it worked. And somehow after Metacomco moved out of the picture, I ended up having to do all the BCPL work.
And then
Randall saved me by converting it into C.
Yes. About 4 years later than that, I showed up at one of the biweekly meetings to say what I've been doing for the last 2 weeks, and I decided to do a skunkworks project to get rid of all the BCPL code and replace it with C and assembler, and I had it up and running and booting. And that was my weekly statement for.
So that was on your 5 bullet points that you submitted for that week.
Yeah.
I had to use my surprise and shocked face because I actually knew what Randall was doing, but oh my God, how amazing!
Yeah,
and it was actually amazing. I mean, that was a quite an effort.
And I never once ran the BCPL compiler.
So, Peter, I had a question for you, not to pick on you, but that's why we're here. One of the things you were instrumental in was when version 2 of the Amiga operating system came out. There were a ton of changes, a lot of visual changes to it. Went from the blue and orange that I technically prefer. No offense. But what was a lot of your work on that? What all went into that?
So when I started, 1.4 was about to reach beta. It wasn't quite a beta. That was a long process. The day I got there, I looked at all the cool stuff that was done and said, you guys ought to call this 2.0. And I said, no. Everyone said, we all agreed that 2.0 was the release where we get to break everybody. Little did we know, because 2.0 ended up, so they did pick the 2.0 name eventually, and it did break a lot of software. That being said, it was still the blue and orange, white, and everything. But the project I had done that I'd shown to Carolyn Shepner and Gail Wellington at World of Amiga in Toronto was a file requester library that I was developing. And it was too big. And Carolyn said, well, we've already licensed one for the next operating system, but we'd like you to send your resume. But it had very carefully styled buttons and scrollers. And I don't know if you think people that had used the Amiga back in those days, scroll bars and sliders were a real mess. Like the raw component to move a box and a track was there, but the implementations were all over the place in terms of how big the knob is, where does it snap to. Things were very inconsistent. And I had kind of refined all that behavior. So Andy said, I want you to build on that and help us rebuild the preferences tools using those components. So the components ultimately became the gadget toolkit, which is a big part of the button look and feel of the software. But at the same time, like the next computer had shipped in October of '88, I think. And that was kind of influential. And one day I came into work at my normal time was about 10 o'clock. And Dave Berezowski, who was he had a C64 background as well, but he was responsible for Workbench. And Steve Beats, who was doing file system drivers and stuff like that, were sitting there, and they had this smug look on their face. I'm like, what's up, guys? And they're like, we're going to wait till everyone else is here. Okay. So slowly people trickle in, Bryce comes in, Randall comes in, eventually everyone's there, and they finally gathered us all around, and they had basically recolored Workbench with the gray, black, and white scheme that we ultimately had, pretty close to the exact colors we ended up with, and had done a little bit of light treatment with the window borders. So that was the genesis of the look, was an all-nighter that the two of them had pulled. So whether that was inspired by the button work I did or next or whatever combination, things were starting to really steamroll. And then, so we basically ran with that. And so between that initiative, I did a lot of the work with getting the window gadgets looking right and perfecting the rendering. Like, it's not just the shapes are different, but if you notice in 2.0, the rendering is very clean. There's no flickering and flashing of any of the elements. We went through that. I made a version of Intuition which had like pauses after every step of the rendering to make sure that we weren't overdrawing pixels. You don't want to resize the window and have the pixels be painted gray and then white and then black and then finally back to gray. So everything is tack sharp because of all the work that we did, and all the behaviors with the scroll bars became standard. And then like no application developer had an excuse anymore. They were hard to tame, but you had a model. You could either use it if you wanted to use the toolkit, or you could say, oh, I still want to build my own, but at least I'll make it work as well as that. So we did all that, and then there was an agreement that we were going to have a sans serif font. We still had the old Topaz in there. And then Kodiak Burns in California, kind of to force the issue, picked a slightly ugly sans serif font because nobody wanted, and he put it in the system to kind of force the issue into the open. And I think there are some 1.4 betas that showcase that font. And then I don't know if you brought it to me or I brought it to you, but we found a font floating around on the not internet at the time that was derived from Topaz. And you said, it's Topaz, we own it. So it was basically Topaz with most of the serifs removed. So I went and cleaned it all up and fixed a bunch of the letters, and the lowercase L to make it not look like a vertical bar. I has a little curl at the bottom, and that was very contentious. A lot of people thought that was wrong. I was very insistent because I wanted it to be distinctive for legibility. Turns out it's a big contribution to the personality of the new font as well. I didn't appreciate that at the time. I was just there for the practical reason of making it look good. And then I fired up the crude font editors of the day and shaved off all the serifs off the other sizes of Topaz. And that's the font that we have. And I guess my big regret is we didn't get the new look menus in time for 2.0. So the menus are still black on a theme where they should have been white. So there were challenges getting those to be software compatible with application software. We finally got around to do that for 3.0.
Just to give you a little more clarity here, this is not a large team of engineers that are doing this. We had maybe 50 guys for chip design, software design, hardware design, mechanical design, QA,
Layout.
This was lean and mean.
In 88, 89, 90, which was probably the largest in terms of the number of
20
people.
people, yeah.
About
20 software guys.
20 software guys total for everything.
Yeah.
Why so many? The original chips were done with 4 or 5 brilliant engineers,
well,
3 or 4 brilliant software
I
people.
guess you guys were just that much more brilliant.
Jeff, I did have a follow-up question for
wanted
you.
to
You
sleep.
mentioned mechanical design. Who did the mechanical design of the A1000?
So A1000, I'm not sure. Los Gatos guys, do you know who did that? For the A500, the industrial design, which is how it looks, was done by this guy out of Commodore Japan, Ito-san. And Ito, I have somewhere in my basement, and I should have brought it because it's awesome. It's a charcoal rendering of how the A500 was going to look before anybody made one, ever. And when I got the first plastic, like 6 months later, off the tooling that was done in Taiwan, it looked exactly the same as Ito's drawing. It was incredible. So it was like, we had some mechanical engineers in Westchester, Pennsylvania, Herb Mosteller and his crew that would go through and they'd take the little charcoal painting of Ito and, do mechanical drawings and then give that to a tooling guy so that they would make a plastic injection molded tool out of that. And then if everything worked out, cross your fingers, you got a sample back. And it's like, yes, it worked.
Yeah, we had a fellow, Rob Jamel, who was worked for Rick Geiger and Commodore Amiga in Los Gatos. He had done, and if you actually look at I think 2 years ago at the VCF, I did I did an exhibit of the Zorro 2 cards and the bringing out of the auto config and the getting rid of the dip switches. But during that time I was doing that, I found Rob Jamel, who was still in California, and he had a bunch of his old artwork. And I'm sure that there's some of his stuff is now on the internet because we posted it. And so it's like, boy, that looks a lot like an A500 because he was actually doing he actually was tasked to do some mock-ups for Ranger, or Los Gatos Ranger. And so you'll find pictures like that on the internet.
Ranger was a follow-up system that didn't get made, is that right?
Ranger was the Los Gatos kind of A2000, and it was it was going to have card slots, and the form factor of the plug-in cards was squarish, whereas the 2000 was more like PC.
Right. It was pretty contentious when I suggested we make an Amiga that looked sort of like a overgrown Commodore 64. It was like, guys, I know how to do this. It's a keyboard. It's a piece of plastic. It's a brick power supply. It's going to be really cheap. Trust me.
And you're going to sell it at Kmart.
Yes. Yes.
And you did.
And I mean, it worked, right? That's what
Sells a lot.
We sold 4 million, so I guess it worked.
I've got a question about, this is for Glenn. Obviously, the Amiga's audio is legendary, the Paula chip. Walking around here today, hearing some of the audio still sounds incredible today. I mean, what were the aims of the Paula chip? What did you want to achieve in designing that?
We didn't expect it to come out nearly as good as it did. We had first one was called Porsche, and it had 8-bit outputs and 4 channels. And then at some point, I came up with this crazy idea that we could get 14-bit dynamic range if we just did a pulse modulation of the thing. And this was much earlier than the line draw and much bigger change. But I talked to Jay about it, and he said, well, build another breadboard. So we built a second breadboard with this idea in it, and also improvements in the disk controller that would make it less sensitive to error flickers in the data. And that's what got made in the end.
Fuller also did more than just audio, didn't it? It did disk control.
Oh, it was the peripherals, all the leftover stuff after I was the junior chip designer, right? All the fancy video stuff was done by the other people. This was the POTS, the disk controller, the audio.
All the leftover bits.
A couple of other GPIOs. Oh, yeah, there was a UART on it, serial link. But yeah, it came out pretty good. And one of the things I was always worried about on CDs was this brick wall filter theory, that a brick wall was an ideal filter. And it's like, I'm not sure if that's right. So we had a relatively slow second-order salt and key roll-off for the output, because otherwise you would get horrible aliasing, because it wasn't really sampling all that fast.
I remember you had the audio filter on the Amiga, and that turned the power LED off, didn't it, when it was bypassed? I remember first time I saw that, I thought, why has my machine just turned itself off? I think you changed that to just dimming the LED later on instead.
Oh, yeah, because some people, you can sometimes use the aliasing. If you're just doing it randomly, then the aliasing is horrible. But if you're really careful about what frequencies you use and make sure that they line up with the color burst just right, you can make it sound incredible because you avoid the aliasing by making things just the right frequency. So a lot people did that, and I was like, who thought of that? That's pretty cool.
So, Randall, I have one for you. So we all, the Amiga was just an amazing computer, but we know how it turned out. Commodore went bankrupt. That was the end of it. Something that you did, I think it was 91, but correct me if I'm wrong. You wrote your blue sky proposal to save the Amiga. I don't expect you to go through the whole thing here. If you want to read it, it's been scanned. It's on the Internet Archive. You can search for Randall's name. What was the purpose behind that? Who was the audience? Who actually read it? Like, did anyone in management read it, and did they care?
Basically, there were a couple of things I wrote about, where we could go forward and improvements. There were at least two different memos, but one of them was it could be a AA Christmas memo and so forth. I went through a bunch of iterations on this memo and passed it by, various people have passed it by. I think Headley, Dave Haney, and other people. Eventually, I passed it up to Jeff when I was all done. And from there, I don't know how high it went. I don't know how politically motivated, received it was to be. It did not actually come to pass.
So remember I told you about the CES life cycle of consumer electronics? Mm-hmm. The smoke and mirrors happens in January. You take orders in June. You build it by September, so it's on the shelf in October, November, December, and you pray to God you did the Tickle Me Elmo for that Christmas.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is,
it was too late.
Electronics Consumer Electronics 101. They call it Black Friday for a reason, right? Mm-hmm. So Mehdi Ali, who was the president of the company, had done a big favor to Irving Gould, the chairman of the company, to get a bunch of money to hold us over because we spent $55 million for the Amiga, bringing the Amiga to market, and we sold a whopping 77,000 of them, and we needed something quick. So we did the A500, great. Poof, we, sold 4 million of those over the years. So great, we survived that. Mehdi Ali, still in charge. Okay, now the finance guy believes he knows everything about marketing, everything about sales, everything about engineering, technology, science, invention, blah, blah, blah. Nothing could be further from the truth. So we're in the middle of designing the A1200. It's an awesome computer, by the way.
And the A4000.
Amazing computer, by the way. He introduces it. His pipeline is full of A500s and A600s. He announces the product the day after Thanksgiving. and can't deliver a single one. I said, dude, you just Osborne the company. What's Osborne?
Yeah.
Okay. So you should, because you need to sell what you have, that's sales rule number one. Sell what you have. He built an inventory for Christmas of A500s and A600s beyond belief. They would have sold just fine. But because he told for only a few bucks more, you can have an A1200, no one wanted to buy a 500 or 600. It turns into Red Friday, not Black Friday. Okay? He did it again the second Christmas. End of story.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Amiga 600 there, which was a curious machine. I mean, it was essentially a smaller A500 Plus.
Well,
It was like
remember what I said about the number of the number of the Amiga is how much it should cost? It was originally called the A300.
Yeah. And in fact, I sent you I think I sent you the manual. It's a printed manual. It says
A300.
Yeah, that is also scanned in on Internet Archive.
So
Thank you, Randall.
Mehdi hired a guy that brought the world the PC Junior. How many people remember the PC Junior? Oh my God. You all remember the PC
Infrared
Junior.
keyboard, I remember that.
With the chiclet keyboard. Okay.
Blue Agapex.
Yeah. So his claim to, they basically, being Commodore, you heard from Al Champfrontier in Sonic thing, when you're a Commodore, all you want to do is cost reduce. You become a really good guy at cost reducing. And they wanted something cheaper than what Jeff Porter could do for a cost on an A500. Go ahead, buddy, try. So they hired Bill Sidneys because he said, I can cut that cost by half. Name that tune. Couldn't be done. So they basically, had to change the model number on the computer because it cost more than an A500 by the time he was done with it.
It's actually a Commodore tradition. The Plus 4 was originally supposed to be cheaper than the Commodore 64. And it was not.
It was not. So you need to be careful about that. I remember Greg Berlin's over here, one of my hardware guys from the days. He had an office right next to Dave. He used to get really pissed off at me that I could predict the cost of a computer before he was done with the schematic.
When we switched it from the A300 to the A600, we did actually add some more RAM because they were trying to keep the RAM down to keep the cost down.
Yeah.
And since they couldn't keep the cost down,
They might as well throw a little bit extra RAM in.
They had IDE on board as well, I remember, didn't they? Was that a late addition too?
the IDE cost nothing. It was like a couple of gates, really, and a connector.
Pins were a limiting factor. We had 84-pin PLCCs. Those were, we're up to 84 pins.
Yeah, but IDE was just so simple as an interface. It was like a few resistors, capacitors, a connector. It was like nothing.
So I don't know if I'm being professionally trolled here. So Mark Rifkin, I don't know if you're here, Mark. He sent me, Mark, you were awesome. He sent me a bunch of really great and really obscure questions. And when I was reading them, I was like, what if he's just making these up? Like maybe this stuff didn't even happen. But the one for Jeff, I just had to ask you. It was there's really two on here, but I'll start with the time you had to take the Concorde to get to a meeting with Mehdi and Irving.
Oh, gosh. I think this was around the A3000 time. Mehdi decided to hire Philippe Starck. I'm sure no one knows who Philippe Starck is in this audience. Oh, famous French designer, right? He designs toothbrushes and restrooms in New York City that you don't know where to pee. You actually pee onto the mirror. It's really strange. And I believe that hotel still exists. So anyways, Philippe Starck, famous industrial designer, he, French, you can guess by the name. So the first meeting of Philippe Starck was in Westchester. Philippe meets Jeff, and, he said, we've hired Philippe. He's going to design the case of the A3000 because it's going to look awesome. And so he came with his original concepts, which had Mickey Mouse ears on a bulbous screen. And It had one floppy drive on this side going that way and another floppy drive going on this way. And his first question to me was, there's too many keys on this keyboard. We have to do something. So my guy said, Jeff, you have the patience of Job. But I said, okay, Philippe, here we go. Here's a raw keyboard. Here's a raw motherboard. Here's a raw hard drive. Here's a raw power supply. You have to fit that inside somehow. And you can't just move the keys around. I know you did in Paris. I know you did in France because it's QWERTY instead of ASCII. FDSA, I don't know, I can't even, whatever. It's Azerte, that's it. But you have to fit it in the box. I have to be able to build it. I said this Mickey Mouse ear speakers on the bulbous monitor. I can't even build that in plastic. The injection mold, I couldn't do it. These are the things that have to go inside. So anyways, he went off. Second meeting in Paris. Fine. Okay, here we go again. So we're pretty much almost at the same spot. He conceded on the keyboard. So we had another meeting to give me some renderings and drawings and blah, blah, blah. And here we go. And I need to be back in Westchester. Oh, there's a Concorde that leaves blah, blah, blah. It only costs $500 more than my business class ticket that I have. I'm going for it, blah, blah, blah. So I get to Heathrow on the ready to board the plane, and the lovely British Airways lady comes on and says, due to the turbulence, we won't be able to have service on our plane today, but we'll be in New York in no time flat, so just grab a biscuit and jump on. And so we went, so it's great. Okay, it's really windy. I'm about to get in a plane that goes Mach 2. No, it's at 40,000 feet. The wind's a lot different up there. So I get on the plane. It's, there's only 100 seats on a Concorde. And when you're 6'3", your head touches the ceiling. So you're doing this. There's only 2 seats on each side. So I make it on the Concorde. We get almost to New York City. We're circling JFK, circling. And all of a sudden you can see on the altimeter, it's going up and up and up. Captain comes on board and says, we're going to have to divert. We're past the noise abatement curfew for the Concorde at JFK. We cannot land in JFK tonight. We're going to Montreal. Peter knows about Montreal. He grew up in Montreal. The lovely Mirabel Airport that we're only disturbing the moose. Or something like that.
For those of you who don't know, it was built about an hour and a bit north of Montreal. They had the plan to build 6 terminals because they had this hockey stick graph of what airplane traffic would be like.
Of course.
And it's closed now, or maybe it's used for cargo. The official logo of the airport was a white elephant.
Yes.
That's
where the Concorde landed that day. And I
far enough from civilization.
Yeah, and
noise concern.
Yeah, and I took the normal flight home that I would have taken, but I never got my $500 back. So, anyways, that's the Concorde story.
We're going to give you guys a chance to ask some questions soon as well. Before we do that, tomorrow we've got another Amiga panel as well. I'm sure Dave Hayne, you'll talk more about the future plans for the Amiga as Commodore was going under. But I know, Randall, you've got a schematic, a blueprint of one of the unreleased AAA chips there at the front of the stage. Maybe hear a bit about kind of what the plans were as a company went under. What was kind of meant to be next?
We'd been working on the AAA chips since, like 88, I don't know, right around the time I joined. And we had finally, in the last few months before everything went poof, and we had no money for anything, and half the people were gone, we actually got to the point where we had AAA systems booting, kind of. They didn't have a working interrupt, which was a small problem. But I was writing test software for the Blitter on AAA, and I was able to get the serial port to work without interrupts by doing some interesting shenanigans, so I could get my data in and out. And I think they had some graphics stuff up and running on them and so forth. the boards now, I think someone in the UK has the last working boards. And I was also working with Glenn here on Mary, because I was the one who was doing all the floppy software stuff. And so we were collaborating a bit on that. And it had really awesome audio and had really fancy floppy support, though floppies were on their way out at the time. It even had some support to directly drive CD-ROMs. Yeah, well, at least in theory it did, through the same hardware that was used for the floppy, I think.
This was designed to cover more of the different codes, different kinds of codes that you could have in a disk controller that would pack more data in the thing. One I remember is called RLL27, but I couldn't run the actual simulation of the chip. So I actually wrote the whole thing in C and tested it that way. And I found that there were some bugs in the sync code so that you could actually have a sync code in a CD in regular data. It was an interesting discovery.
I got one little story about MPEG way back. That was probably
the Bon Jovi story.
Oh,
It's a different one.
yeah, that's
That was
probably
another one Mark gifted me.
that's
And I'm looking at it
probably
like,
good.
Jeff never even heard of Bon Jovi. This is a fake.
So no, it's that was the first MPEG video that we had playing on the Amiga. So it was I found this company in California called C-Cube that made this awesome, MPEG decoder chip, and we figured out how to basically genlock it to the Amiga so that you could, play back video without having a NewTek video toaster connected to your Amiga with, tape machines and video discs and all this other. Digital video was still really new back then.
Yeah. MPEG-1.
MPEG-1. So I got myself somehow invited to be on the MPEG-1 ANSI ISO committee with Philips, who was doing all these CDI-based things, and they were paying some big bucks to some movie theaters for, movie rights on 5-inch round shiny things. And we made with the C-Cube chip. I think I still have a C32 with an MPEG decoder at home.
I have one of those.
And we could play the Philips movies on a CD32. So it didn't, fine, go get your movies from the Philips guys and play them on your Amiga.
Yep. Yeah. There was also an add-on for the A500, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was also done using it. You and I went out to California to meet with the C-Cube guys.
Yeah.
And LSI, I think. And
that Bon Jovi video was like the first. That was the boing ball for MPEG videos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Seal as well.
Yeah, Seal. I had some buddies at I remember going to talking to Warner Custom Music because I wanted to license some more stuff. Yeah. Right? And I showed up with my demo of a 5-inch round shiny thing with a movie on it. And I said, gentlemen, this is the future of movies. And they looked at me that said, Jeff, do you understand? I just paid, I don't know how many millions of dollars to build a VHS duplicating plant in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Get out of my face. And I said, didn't you have this problem with cassettes and CDs? Yeah. Okay. So it was, we did manage to license a couple songs from them for demo purposes and things like that. And they eventually came around, and I'm not sure what that plant is like in Scranton, Pennsylvania, but maybe, they'll be doing something else with that plant these days.
Yeah. And we also had Darren Greenwald implement CD plus G to you could have a CD, audio CD with graphics sort of.
Okay, that was before you could have movies.
Yes, and right, and
it was karaoke.
CD
mostly
plus
karaoke.
G is still used for karaoke.
It is.
The last thing, though, no one seems to have noticed, but when the Chinese bought the Amiga as one of the many purchasers, they actually cared a lot about karaoke CDs. And no one seems to have noticed before this that the mouth movements and the video did not match using our MPEG card. So it took me like a month to get that working.
We thank you.
I have no idea that it was so important to them, but And
Well, we have got a few minutes for a Q&A. So we've got a wireless mic doing the rounds. Just put your hand up if you have a question. We'll start with David.
Yes, hello guys. The question I want to ask is that, being within Commodore on the other side of the pond, we were desperately waiting for advancements in the technology, AAA and AGA. Considering how well you guys did with Amiga and developing it with a small number of people, why did it take so long to actually get a AAA or an AGA even close to market? It took, for some reason, did they starve you of funds, or what was the reason behind that?
Mostly the CES cycle and MEDI not having any long-term ability to understand what it takes to do this stuff. I mean, most of the time it takes 9 months to create something from start to finish, quickest. And putting 2 men on the job doesn't make it go any faster.
It was a pregnant pause, in other words, not months, yeah.
So it's difficult, and especially when you've got custom chips. Look at what these guys did. How, you'll spend a year doing this kind of stuff to get your first custom chips, right?
Yeah, but wasn't the AAA started in 88 or?
Yeah, AAA took a while, and there were various reasons for that I'm not particularly knowledgeable about. But
I mean, things are silicon design technology is a lot better these days.
Oh yeah, a lot. The tools weren't there.
When we did these, we didn't have access to silicon design software to do this. So these were gate level simulations of what the chips were supposed to do. So these, if you look at the schematics for the chips, these are faithful representations of what those gates were. These aren't functional simulations. These are gate level simulations.
And the gates
It could have been a lot smaller if they had been like functional simulations.
But now you have, these massive programmable arrays that you just do software and you push download and a chip comes out.
Right,
exactly. So the original design of this chip was done in colored pencil on Ruby Lith. That was our design tool methodology.
Yeah.
No modern tools.
What was interesting was that AAA was taking a while. I wasn't that close to it, so I can't comment on the reasons, but teams were small, so individuals could make a difference. And a gentleman named Bob Rabel in the chip group said, I think I can do a turn on that's based on the ECS architecture that brings us to the next level. And that became the AA project. And that came together really fast. And so AAA stood for Advanced Amiga Architecture, and AA stood for less than AAA. It didn't have Amiga. And marketing eventually called it AGA. But, and that came together, it seemed extraordinarily fast.
That came together in like 6 months, I'd say. Yeah. It was fast. Another question, yeah.
Okay, this is probably out of left field, but was it possible, necessary, or just even desirable to defrag an Amiga hard drive? And I asked because I had a friend.
It was absolutely possible. Having worked on hard drive stuff there, probably did a better job of keeping things defragged to begin with into the allocation strategies. But the data could get scattered across the disk if you were in a tight levels. So absolutely possible, and would be definitely helpful if it was fragmented. We tried to keep it as unfragmented as possible as we were going along.
I just wanted to ask, could you guys tell us a little bit about how things were in the company, both before and after Thomas Radigan with his departure as the CEO?
Tom Radigan came from Pepsi. Okay, knows how to sell sugar wire. He knows how to sell. But I can remember a meeting with RJ and maybe Dale and Glenn were there.
Just like Scully and Apple.
Yeah, it's just like Scully and Apple. They had a very strategic, high-level meeting with the engineers, with Tom Radigan and the higher mucky mucks, and said, "Oh, there was this guy by the name of Marshall Smith that was there. Yeah, he was right at the launch of the Amiga." And so Radigan puts his feet up on the table of the boardroom and says, "I don't know, Marsh, what do you think? What's the most important thing that these engineers should be working on?" And they turned around and they said, "I think the cost-reduced 128 would be good." And I just went, "Do you know who you're talking to? Do you know who you're talking to? The brain trust of the Amiga, and you just told him that the C128 cost reduce was the most important thing. So it's like, yee. So there was a disconnect there. He didn't last too long. And then they brought in a bunch of Apple guys. Oh, they at least know computers, you know. So now we have Frank Leonardi and Cofferman, Harry Cofferman, yeah. So I remember Frank did one of these. I had this little chat with Steve, and let me tell you, I know exactly how to sell this. We're going to put it in, you know, these Apple computer stores, and we're going to sell a lot of these. And I said, and we're going to mark the price up a lot. And it's like, Frank, it's a $500 game machine with a keyboard on it. We don't want to sell it for $1,500. We tried that once with the A1000. I said, we need to sell it in Toys R Us and, you know, places like that. So anyways, that was a struggle. The first guys in sales and marketing from the Commodore 64 heyday were all, you know, selling stuff to Sears and places like that, mass merchandisers, right? So they knew that channel. And I remember going on a couple, you know, dog and pony shows to the Sears Tower at Christmas because they had to decide by February whether the Amiga 500 was going to be in the Sears catalog for the following Christmas or not. And so it was right after, this must have been, A500 was first shown in January of 87, CES. Little bit less smoke, little bit less mirrors. It was actually working. First plastic, first boards, first everything running, you know, Defender of the Crown like a charm. And it was, you know, so it's the middle of winter in Chicago. I'm schlepping a 1084 monitor and an Amiga 500 through the snow up to the top level of the Sears Tower in Chicago. And it's like, we're showing, you know, I'm doing the demo for them and let the sales guys clean it up. All right, you take the order, I'll do the demo. Here we go. And the guy, Marv Jerso, wow, I'm pulling all these names out of my brain. The head buyer for Sears said, Jeff, we could sell you 1 million of these. If we could only clone you and, you know, put one of you in every store. So I learned a lesson. You shouldn't put your head of engineering on a demo. You should have the salesman do the demo because he's not an engineer, right? If he can do a demo and impress the buyer, that's probably a better idea. So that was a hard lesson learned.
Let's get another question.
We have another question down here.
I'm glad you mentioned Harry Copperman because we remember when he came on and a lot of stuff was coming out. You had a Amiga Unix, you had the networking cards, you had the TCP IP, and we really believed at that time that they were going to go after the workstation market. And then he got promoted, and then nothing happened afterward. What was going on behind the scenes? Because we were lost.
From these jackets that a few of us have from the A3000 launch that you were at, in the Palladium in New York City. It was a great launch, you know, but multimedia and computers this was a new thing. It's a real new thing. You know, the video toaster was just getting its sea legs on the A2000 by then. And now all of a sudden we come up with an A3000. It's really new. So it's like, unfortunately, by that time, 90% of Commodore sales were in Europe. 90%. The U.S. market, because of the mistakes that they made with the 500, was decimated, unfortunately. So that's probably the thing behind the scenes.
Yeah, I have a question here. In the TV miniseries *Halt and Catch Fire*, you saw the engineering and I guess the sales staff really just flat out burning their time and energy into creating these projects. How closely do you think your life experience in creating these cutting edge products mirrored that? And how well did university prepare you for that?
So I remember when we were trying to ship 2.04, myself and Bryce and probably Peter and some of the others, we had some cots in a spare room at Westchester that was full of old video games for some reason, like, big stand-up video games. And we would actually literally sleep on those cots trying to get 2.04 out. And the company would pay to have meals brought in for us in the evenings. And we got lobster from someplace.
You had cots. We slept on the floor.
Well, the cots were shared. That would have been luxury.
So at times it was like that.
We were living the dream. We were all 20-something guys living the dream. We were building computers that we wanted for ourselves.
God, yeah.
It was our entire social life, the company,
It was.
work.
Yeah.
I mean, when we went to parties, it was like the same people we were working with.
Yeah.
And, the discussions, normal party talk. Can we do that chip? How did that? It was all technical talk. So, yeah.
I wouldn't have traded it for anything, but it was an amazing time in history, especially on the East Coast of the United States. Here for us, we had a fab in Norristown, Pennsylvania. It's a super fun site, by the way. I think you toured it the other day.
I was just there yesterday.
Okay. So you can take your own tour if you'd like, grab a souvenir of broken glass. And, it was an amazing time. Yeah. We were running $1 billion garage shop, and there weren't a lot of marketing guys telling us what to do.
Yeah.
You had engineers, right? Salesmen. We had bean counters and factories. That's it, right? So it was a really fun time.
Well, I think we are about out of time.
I guess I'd just like to say thank you. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for all of you. And it warms the cockle of my heart to go through all those rooms over there and see all the stuff that people have done. So you put a smile on my face, and I want to just say thanks to all of you.
Well, please give a big thank you to our panel.
Yeah.